When someone asks you where you're from, what's the first thing that comes to mind? For me, it depends on who's asking, where they're asking me, and this nuanced answer started the moment when my family and I moved to the US. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Carry On Friends, the Caribbean American Experience. In this episode, I will be going deeper into the Caribbean Diaspora Experience Model, which I call CDEM. And CDEM was created by me through Carry On Friends. It is a simple yet powerful way to help us better understand how Caribbean cultural identity forms, evolves, and expresses itself outside the region and in diaspora communities. Now, this model is grounded in real life experiences, mine, my family's experiences, my friends' experiences, my community's experiences, and stories heard through the podcast. CDEM offers a simple, relatable way to explore the complexity of identity within our community. And it breaks down a complex topic into 6 relatable real world lenses. So, CDEM reflects what many of us already know deep down, but haven't had the language to describe. This isn't theory. As I said before, it is a lived experience model built from years of observation, reflection, introspection of my life, my family's life, my immigrant journey, conversations with friends, and community insight. This model doesn't tell you who you should be. It helps you see who you are, where you've been, and how your identity has grown across time, place, and relationships. A few episodes ago, I introduced the Caribbean Diaspora Experience Model, CDEM, to the audience. If you missed that episode, not to worry. I'm going to do a quick overview of the 6 lenses within the model. Lens 1, where you start shapes the journey. There are 6 starting points identified in the model. So whether you were born in the region, migrated at a young age, or were born in the diaspora, your starting point influences and shapes how your identity develops and evolves. There's a sublens, and that sublens, 1.1, is what was happening when you started. Lens 2 is where you live plus what you seek equals how you connect. This lens examines how your location and personal drive to connect or disconnect influence your access to and engagement with Caribbean culture. Lens 3, cultural anchors keep us rooted. So we have tangible elements of cultural anchors like food, music, language, celebrations, family structure, church, even podcasts, TV series, plays, movies, these types of things. These tangible sensory, visual experiences help maintain continuity across generations and borders. They preserve memory and identity across time and place, and they ground us when everything else shifts. Lens 4, your identity will shift. That's the point. And our identity evolve as we evolve. As we grow through life stages, the way we connect with and express our culture naturally shifts. That evolution isn't a loss, it's just a recalibration. And for this, we have a sublens 4.1, and that sublens is how you show your identity also changes. Lens 5 is cultural identity influences how we show up at work. This lens explores how our relationship with work is deeply tied to how we were raised, what we were taught to value, and how we express identity in professional spaces. And lens 6 is you're not either or, you're both and. So being Caribbean and American or Caribbean and Canadian, British, etc., it's not a contradiction, it's a reality. This lens affirms that our identity is complex, it's layered, and valid in every way. This lens affirms the multiplicity of the diaspora identity and helps people feel confident in the complexity of who they are. This was a high level introduction or overview of Caribbean Diaspora Experience Model, CDEM, which I will call CDEM from here on out. Today, we're diving deeper into Lens 1 and its sublens. Where you start shapes the journey, and what was happening at the time matters. I opened the episode asking, when someone asks you where you're from, what's the first thing that comes to mind? And for me, I said, it depends on who's asking, where I am when they're asking this question. So for me, I'm going to say Jamaica because I was born there. But for my kids, some friends, and some past guests on the show, they might say I'm born in the US, but my parents are from Jamaica, which is what I know many born in the diaspora say. For me, my family's unique migration experience, I didn't realize that it was unique until it was much later in life. So, unlike a lot of friends who I grew up with or went to high school with, I came to this country the same time my mother came. So my mother and my three brothers and I all arrived in the US at the same time. Traditionally, the parent comes, gets settles, and then they send for the kids. That was just not my experience. Because this was my experience, this shapes how I view culture, how I view my identity. And as I mentioned before, we're diving deeper into the first lens of CDEM, and where you start shapes everything that follows. So there are 6 starting points in Lens 1. Point 1, you're a Caribbean-born adult migration, which was my mom. You're a Caribbean-born 9 to 17 migration. So this was me and my brother who immediately follows me in birth order. And then you have Caribbean-born under 9 migration, and these were my other brothers. Then you have diaspora-born and connected to culture, so these were my cousins. And then there was diaspora-born and disconnected, and I've met some people who are like this, mostly as I started Carry On Friends. And then you have transnational or multi-location. And I'm going to dive deeper into what this is because we all know someone within these categories. So why do these starting points matter? Each starting point creates a different foundation and different sets of challenges. It influences how we move through all the other lenses of the model and how we even look at cultural identity. It sets the tone for our entire cultural journey. So for Caribbean-born adult migration, which is essentially people who moved as adults from the Caribbean into the diaspora, they have a very strong understanding of Caribbean life and cultural norms, and migration is a conscious experience and a choice, right? Compared to me, when I moved, I didn't have a choice, right? So when people ask me, why did you move here? I didn't have a choice. My mom said we were moving, so we were moving. The challenge that Caribbean-born adult migration have is what is generally known, I didn't make this up, is the awareness of race. So typically you're coming from predominantly Black countries where race is very different, and how they experience that in the global north countries, America, Canada, the UK, elsewhere, is very different. And it's usually very hard to adjust to because now they're aware that they are, not that they didn't know that they were Black, but a negative experience associated with that. And then the challenge is adapting their established identity, which was, yeah, I'm a Black person in this country. It's not a big deal, to this new location, to wherever they move to. And so a lot of time you say, you grew up in Jamaica and you moved to New York when you were in your 20s or 30s, you know, or even, late 30s or 40s, whenever you moved, and now you have to adjust how you were back home into this new place. And that's a very hard transition to make, especially when you can't name what you're experiencing. And I think that has been the challenge. People have been experiencing it, but they haven't been able to name it. Or they've said, well, auntie so and so, mama so and so, this person come America donkey years long before me, and they didn't have to deal with this. So, maybe it's just me, right? And so a lot of times that's how they are not brushing it aside, but trying to justify not addressing it because they don't know that it's something to address, right? But it is a common challenge. So, as I mentioned before, I'm in the 9 to 17 migration group. And I moved here when I was 14. And at that age, I had already gone through high school up until the ninth grade in Jamaica. So I have very strong memories and connection to Jamaica. When I moved here, because my mom did not come here and establish herself in advance, I had to figure out how I was going to navigate America at the same time my mom is also navigating America. So just figuring out how to make it fit. I'm still deeply connected to Jamaica, my friends. Like I said, I went to high school. I had very strong ties in church. I still have those friendships while also building relationships with the cousins that I didn't really know until I moved here. And of course, going to school. Because we're younger, we navigate the disruption to identity very differently in the development years. We adapt maybe a little quicker, but depending on where we live, which I don't want to go too much into, which is why I said the lens builds on each other, the adaptation may be smoother. So I'll just give a quick peek in here. Moving to Brooklyn, New York, I didn't have to adapt that much. I just didn't. Versus someone who may have moved maybe to the Midwest, right? So it's a very different experience. It wasn't until I went to school that I understood this idea of barrel children. Not that I didn't see it growing up in Jamaica, but I didn't know that there was this term for it where the parent, whether it's the mother or the father or whomever, migrates first and then the children follow. They'll have a very different experience. Most of the time, barrel children are left home or left back home with extended families while one parent or both parents migrate. For barrel children, in addition to their starting points, their experience in the diaspora and maybe their how they see themselves is going to be based on their relationship with the parent or lack thereof and the situation they come into. So for instance, I've heard this story. Many barrel children come here and there's a sibling born in America or foreign. And so how does that impact the relationship with the diaspora-born sibling versus the mom? So again, just layers. My experience is very different from my brother's experience. So my brother, who is 2 when we all got off the flight, has a very different relationship with Jamaica. He was too young to remember a lot of things. A lot of his connections are based on the stories we've told or when he's gone back. And that in and of itself is just a different experience. And we'll get into where he maintains connections. And that's typically liking the anchors, the food, the music, etc. Right? And for the other Caribbean born younger, it's just obvious that, the younger you are, sometimes the memories aren't as strong as you moved early or later. And, you know, there's this emotional connection to a place that they have very few memories of that place, but there's a connection emotionally. And as we go through the other lens in CDEM, you have like cultural anchors. So as you can see, my mother, my brothers, we all had different cultural connections and we're in the same family. And that's all because of where we were in life when we made the move to the US. So you have diaspora born and connected to culture. You all know it, you all see it. That was my cousin. You know, when I came up here, I remember one cousin asked if I knew how to do the butterfly, and my uncle said, "She just come from Jamaica. She should be asking you if you know to do the butterfly." But my cousins were a big dancer, dance pan, head top, butterfly. They were really connected to culture, the food, the dance, everything, the way they spoke. Sure, you understood that. You could hear that they had American accents, but they were talking the patois same way, right? The diaspora born connected, they're raised in homes. So inside the house, they're Jamaican, they're Trini, they're Bajan inside the house. And when they go outside, it's America. They have a clear awareness of the cultural difference from mainstream society, even though there is always one incident that brings this to their awareness. Michaela has talked about the lunch that she would bring to school, or a past guest, Mulaney, would say that people would ask her why her mom spoke funny. And she didn't think her mom spoke funny. Her mom sounded normal. So they have a clear awareness of the cultural difference in mainstream society after one inciting incident or one incident that brings this awareness to them. They're often comfortable, going back and forth in cultural context because this is just how life is. And they visit back home periodically, often, maybe more when they were younger. And, as they get older, maybe not as much, but often enough, or vice versa, but they go back home. And then in terms of multinational, I wanted to take some time to explain this. So you might have cousins who were born in the US and at some point they were sent back home to go to school. And then at some point they left back home and came back to America. Or you had some who were born back home, came up here for one reason or another, they got sent back home, and they commute back and forth. So this is what I call transnational, because they've spent significant time in the diaspora and back home, wherever back home is. And I'm not judging the circumstance under which they were sent back home. Every family is different for whatever reason. Sometimes the parents had to work and, to grow up in the Caribbean life, or to have somebody watch them, it was better they got sent back home so grandma, auntie, or somebody could watch them. And, sometimes I've heard people feel like they could get a better schooling back home. So there were a variety of reasons why this back and forth movement was happening when people were younger. I just gave an example as for children, but even as adults, maintaining homes and moving back and forth in the space. And I get it. Not everyone has that luxury to do that, but it does happen. And there's a very different experience for people who have lived in both places, and they've experienced it differently, and they're doing it, I don't want to say simultaneously, but it's for short bursts of time, and it's interchange. It shapes their experience much differently. Recently, I had Stacy Liebert on the podcast, who is the CEO of Grenada's Tourism Authority. And Stacy, I want to call her out here because she had very interesting journeys. So she migrated from Jamaica during her youth. So that puts her in Caribbean born, the 9 to 17 migration. And she's evolved into transnational because she's returned to the region, first Anguilla and now Grenada, for work and life. And her story illustrates how identity isn't fixed. It's evolved across location, roles, responsibility. And so the important takeaway here is starting points aren't permanent categories. You can, aside from where you were born, you can find yourself in the transnational category. And, this evolution based on life choices and circumstances show the dynamic nature of cultural identity. I also want to acknowledge the diaspora born and disconnected. And there's usually a reconnection journey. I want to acknowledge that disconnection happens for a variety of reasons and under various circumstances. I'm not here to judge the why, but to acknowledge that it happens. And each person's family or each person's situation is different. There is a growing reconnection movement, a trend where people are seeking to reconnect with heritage, especially through digital platforms. I'm not saying that reconnection is easy, but just acknowledging that it's a trend and more and more people want to do it. And oftentimes, you know, you find adults seeking connection to parent or grandparents, or more connection to culture they never knew. This disconnection doesn't make someone less than. It's simply a different starting point with its own journey. So it doesn't make them less Caribbean or less. It just makes their journey very different. And so, a quick recap, we're in lens one of Caribbean Diaspora Experience Model, CDEM, and where you start shapes the journey. And in this, you have 6 starting points: Caribbean born, adult migration, 9 to 17 migration, under 9 migration, diaspora born connected to culture, diaspora born disconnected from culture, and transnational or multi location. So now I want to go into the sub lens, lens 1.1. What was happening when you started? So, in addition to where your cultural journey began, this sublens considers the social, political, and emotional context at the time. Were you born pre or post internet? Did you migrate during a time of political unrest or economic hardship? Did you come in the 80s or did you move to the US in the 90s like I did? Did your family feel safe expressing culture, or did they silence it to protect you? These historical and societal forces shape how families make decisions about expressing their identity, and CDEM honors that layered complexity. So, when I moved to Brooklyn, New York in the 1990s, there was an explosion of dancehall culture. I mean, it was much different than my uncles who came here in the 70s, his uncle before that who was here in the 50s and 60s, or other cousins moving here during the 80s. The decade of migration affects cultural expression and your opportunities to express yourself. I've had guests on the show who've said that their parents did not allow them to speak patois, or for some people, they couldn't speak Creole outside of the house. And this is why the sublens is important. The decade you migrated, what was happening at the time, politically, economically, socially, is going to impact how you express yourself, how you see yourself in the different starting point. For me, moving in the 90s and born in Jamaica, there, I express myself and culture in a level of confidence where I know other people who did not have that same experience. There is one other aspect that is going into lens 2, but I want to mention it here. So in addition to your starting point and what was happening when you started, the geographic location is going to impact your journey, right? And so I'll dive deeper into that into lens 2. So what does this mean for understanding identity? Starting points create different strengths and challenges. So no starting point is better or worse. It's just different. And understanding your starting point helps you navigate your cultural journey with more intention. And that recognition that even within families, different starting points create different relationships to culture. As I mentioned, my mother, my three brothers, and myself, with the five of us, have very different experiences to culture. What I remember and my brother immediately after me remembers is very different from what my two younger brothers will even remember or have a connection to. All they have are the stories that we tell them, right? And those are the stories they connect to. So what this starting point helps me to do is I I know how to assess my brother's experience because I'm like, oh, is him come here young, so certain things he's not going to remember. So I have a little bit more patience for when I have to explain certain things. Or with my kids, the starting points are a way to help us better also communicate with each other and give each other grace and some understanding, because we know that their context or how they see things is different. It's not the same. Even if we're in the same family, it is not the same. And so lens one is where we are grounded, we're rooted. Everything else builds on lens one. What was your starting point? What was happening in the world when your cultural journey began? And by cultural journey, sometimes it's just when you were born or when you migrated, right? How has understanding your starting point help you make sense of your cultural experiences? What aha moments you've gotten from this, if any? So I'll be diving into each lens in individual episodes. So the next episode, I'll be talking about geography and motivation. And each lens feeds or builds into the other lens. So we talked about, again, starting points and what was happening. This feeds into the next lens of geography and motivation. I would like you to reflect on how your starting point has shaped your journey. Now that you have this awareness, how is it shaped how you carry yourself in this world? If you're not subscribed to the Carry On Friends newsletter, please do. And I think you'll enjoy it. CDEM is a life's work. And I'm really proud and excited to share this awareness and this language, because once I understood, I saw myself, how I carried myself was very different. So I can't wait to continue to break down the lens and explore more with you. If you have questions, please send them. And as I love to say at the end of every episode, walk good.